Guys like to ask questions, I think. All right, this session is a fill-in session, and these guys put this together just recently and thought it would be kind of fun for you guys to have a chance to ask questions. It's going to be different than the other sessions. It's not going to be a presentation and questions at the end. There will be questions throughout. I believe the original title of this was Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Nagios, but We're Afraid to Ask, and that didn't sound too professional, so we came up with Ask Nagios, an open discussion on future directions and technology. Now, I have two microphones. One, unfortunately, we don't have two handhelds, so if the questions get going, while one person's got the microphone, put your hand up, I'll get the other one to you. I'll turn it on. You just hold it up just like this, okay? We got it? Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Ethan Galstad and Scott Wilkerson.
So I guess this is basically just a Q&A session, meaning you guys can ask us questions about things that, anything you want. Like if you have a suggestion for something you'd like to see for a product improvement, or have a question about, our roadmap or anything.
Or development products that you guys would meet your needs in the future. So if there's something that's lacking in your organization, and it kind of fits within the IT realm, primarily monitoring, but other IT related items. If it's something that is just a hole in your infrastructure, and that's something that you'd like to talk about, we can have a discussion. Ethan's going to actually take some notes. That's why he's got his laptop out there. So as we talk, he'll take notes, and we can use them hopefully to improve the products in which we have, and maybe come up with new products in the future that meet the needs of the people in this room.
Maybe to kick things off, just to give us a background of like who's in this room right now, like what you use. How many people use Nagios XI? How many people use Core? Okay, so it's about 60-40, 60% Core, 40 XI.
How many have tried Network Analyzer? Well, that's two. That's pretty good, being it's only been around a week, and we told nobody about it prior to the conference. So that's pretty good, that actually.
Yeah. So do you guys have any questions about, what you want to do, what you want to see in either Core or XI or anything else? And push?
What kind of criteria or whatever helps feature requests? Trying to think of what I want to really ask here. Yeah, get priority. What helps you decide on what feature requests get your attention?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, there are 1,000 things that people want, but the most likely things to get implemented are things that would be useful to a lot of people. So if you have a really specific request for your environment, unless we see that can be applied to a bunch of people, it's going to go into a lower priority unless we can see, okay. We actually have done that in the past where somebody says, hey, we want this feature, and they describe it in a way that would really fit their environment, and we say, okay, we're not going to do exactly that, but we're going to do something that gets 90% of what you want, and here's how to get the last mile, but we're going to keep it at the 90% point, so it's generic to all users.
Right, because the items that we spend our bandwidth on, we develop in-house to go in the products. Ultimately, they don't want to be so specific that other people don't really have a use for them, can't extend them to meet their capabilities. Most of the items that we've created, including Nagios Core, was designed to, in fact, be extended. So the items that we add in often are, like Ethan said, they'll get you close, or it may meet your needs specifically, but another organization might have just that extra little sauce that gets them the rest of the way there. If something's a total one-off, that doesn't mean that it can't be developed. We do custom development, and depending on the item, or obviously we had a whole session just a moment ago, some items can be added in if you have a PHP developer on staff, contract us, anything like that.
Next question, anybody? It's a question and answer session, gentlemen.
Do write some for them, Ethan?
Dave.
Yeah, I did. I have some questions. If,
Okay, I've got two questions. One very specific, one amazingly general. So, which way round would you like, gentlemen?
Doesn't really matter.
yeah.
Okay, it's three questions. Amazingly specific, because of what I've been talking about today. Have you ever considered doing something with the licensing relating to ARM processors? Yeah, because you're getting to the way where your licensing costs 20 times as much as the hardware it's running on.
So, as in, is the real question, do you want to put Nagios XI on a Raspberry Pi?
Yes,
That's the direct question?
that's the.
Yeah, so to get right to the point, it wouldn't make sense to stick a $2,000 product on a $35 piece of hardware. You probably actually wouldn't want to in that case anyway. I think you'd probably want to run something lighter, either Nagios Core or an agent, even a simple cron job or something that pushes data either up to Core or XI, where you centralize all the stuff that people are going to eventually want, like performance graphs, dashboards, up to a central server, because you're not likely to use that on a Pi.
Yep.
Is that not what you wanted to hear, Dave?
I'm easy, you know me.
But yeah, I mean,
Was that the general one or the specific one?
That was a specific one.
okay.
The general one is, over time, what appears to have happened in Core is that you've gone to do a lot of efficiency work, a lot of polling work, a lot of trapping. What's happened is that the visual display, the visualization has dropped off. You've let that roam onto other projects. And it would be really nice, I think, if you actually owned a proper visual interpretation of what you produce.
Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah.
Okay. On one hand, I think you're somewhat correct. The visualization probably hasn't been updated. But if you've been in some of the other talks, you actually probably heard that they are opening up a whole bunch of new APIs to be able to access that data in different ways. Those APIs will, in fact, I believe, introduce a lot more development from the community to be able to take new visualizations. In addition to that, there was an idea that was conceived a while ago about potentially doing some visualization updates to it, maybe PHP or something like that. However, it takes a lot of time and development, man hours, and
Yeah, and
that's-
we actually do have, so for those of you who aren't aware, I mean, Core is just the basic interface. There are a lot of other interfaces on Exchange that the community has developed. We actually, about a year or two ago, Mike Guthrie, who now moved to a warm state and is not with us, unfortunately, but we actually asked him to write a PHP interface for Nagios Core and said, make it lightweight, make it work. It's called Nagios V-Shell. It's open source. It's on Exchange. The problem with open source projects is they are community driven. And ultimately, it's a hobby project that there are a ton of things out there for Nagios that have been developed and they're awesome. Half of them, you probably won't even be able to contact the original author anymore because at a certain point, people stop working on them. So we certainly could, but what I've heard from the community over the years is everybody wants a better interface, but nobody wants to write it or contribute to it and stick with it. Because if you're a developer, sysadmin, network admin, you might be able to set up a system, design it, but to inherit an old system is often tougher. So people don't often want to come on to a project that has been abandoned and try to take it over. They want to reinvent the wheel. So I agree. I mean, the visualization options would be great. So who here would like to write it? Nick, you're on our team. So yeah, I mean, is that a volunteer or is that a question? Well, this is no. I you know. And we could certainly do that. I mean, we could do that internally, but then we're spending our resources on open source stuff versus fixing stuff for our customers, which, if you're our paying customer, do you want us to take care of your clients' needs first?
And clearly,
When they
it's a-
need something right away? I mean,
Clearly, it's a balancing act for us because while we do still contribute a lot to the open source community, the Nagios community, we also have to balance the resources that we have to be able to get the requests that we have done. There's not enough always in the day, and and often not enough funding.
well, and it's like, we've done, other than VShell, we've got some of the visualization stuff that's come out that you guys might not be aware of, or like Nagios BPI, like the business process intelligence stuff. That's open source. The CCM, which is essentially a clone of an improved version of Nagios QL, the configuration manager, that's open source. We put a ton of time into that. And then NSTI is another, SNMP front end. It's and those are all open source components. So there is stuff on the front end. It's just bringing it together and tying it together. That's the biggest challenge. So.
Have you guys considered working with Thruck teams? They do a front-end overcore that has some of those features. It's very familiar looking, core-like, but just has a feature set, uses fast CGI. I don't know if you're familiar with the project, but we use it in production in my office, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, we're familiar with it. It's listed on the Exchange site from what I can remember. There are the awesome thing and the challenge is there are like 24 front ends to choose from. And so no one front end, it's like an agent. Until NCPA, you had a dozen agents to choose from, each with their, benefits and problems, but it's the same thing with the front end. People want something different all across the board.
I'll say one more thing on the front end too. When we switched about a year and a half ago to use just a milder UI with barely any colors changed, and it wasn't even a force change. There's a lot of people in the community that have their installed. They're very familiar with the look and feel of it. If they perform an upgrade and things change, they freak out. So
I think what Scott's referring to is the background color of the Nagios core interface changed from black to white. And it was a traumatic experience for a lot of people. And we understand that. But anyway.
To shift gears, but is there any direction on the question of high availability? If I'm planning to use XI and stick with it, and I want the stability of being downstream from what you're providing, but I want to build it into a way that I can make it HA and keep it that way. So what is on the horizon that would change the choices I make right now, making it highly available?
It's a very good question.
I don't necessarily know if I know of anything that's on the horizon that would change that. Your high availability options is really going to be specific to your enterprise and the needs that you have and the equipment that you have available to do it. There's multiple high availability options, different ways that you can achieve that. As far as I know, I don't think we've planned anything already.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are different scenarios that you can handle high availability. Do you want, failover, automatic failover when an XI server fails, something else takes over the job of monitoring?
Well, that, and I've got physical servers so that I can have physical modems for real out of band. So the VMware high availability doesn't fit the bill. I want failover. I'm actually putting it as the front end as a service to monitoring that exists elsewhere, and we're going to bring it in, and as a service to the variety of other units within our larger unit that have been doing monitoring or should learn to do it.
Yeah.
They should have been using metrics before now, and we're going to provide this to get them on board. So as a service, I need to keep it available.
Yeah.
And yeah, that means having something failover, having.
Sure. Well, I think it was Nate Broderick. I don't think he's here, but he's done some work. We do have some stuff in XI, like we've got a wizard in XI where you can monitor another XI server, and that was designed so that XI can monitor another instance of itself, if it sees there's a problem, it can take over the job of monitoring. I think, and we did a little bit of work with Nate on that. You know, he had a similar type of setup from what I can remember. They needed high availability failover, and they basically, underneath the hood of XI is still its core, and you can script a lot of stuff. So I think they whipped together just like an rsync thing where they could synchronize their configs to achieve high availability. If, you know, what you then need is something to trigger switch over if the primary is detected as failing, but
Yeah,
it's
generally the scenario for most of those, besides the r-syncing of the configs, which is a pretty common scenario, so they're both monitoring the same things. What often happens is your primary, we're talking about XI here, your primary may send outbound transfers to the secondary, which does not have active checks enabled, and then you would create a event handler for the machine that is monitoring the primary, and have it trigger to basically flip the command to turn active checks on that machine. There is some challenges there, and it really depends on your environment.
I've looked at the options and I'm reading through the choices to figure out the best path. I was just curious if there's changes in the way that any plans. Obviously 4 is a big change in managing workload and possibly distributing it. But
One thing I will point out is while Core 4 is highly efficient as far as reducing disk I/O and whatnot, and does have worker processes, from your XI installs point of view, it's going to act exactly the same way. It's just going to distribute the load between the workers that are running underneath the hood. So that wouldn't really change a high availability scenario. The options for high availability would be set up within the guidelines of what they have been in the past.
Yeah, we have talked about the r-syncing of configs in combination with the other wizards that are already in XI for a little deeper, like an easy button on the web interface where you say, here's my failover server, here's the IP address.
I like easy buttons.
I mean, we can do that. You know, when there's an easy button like that, you are limited to how things are implemented. But maybe that's a discussion, you know, that we can revisit again and have an easy option like that. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Good suggestion.
Who is next?
What one or two things you wanted to get into Core 4 and ran out of time to implement that you really wished you could have done?
I think you'd have to talk to Eric Stanley more than that. I think because you know, I've been kind of on top of the high-level stuff that's happening with Core, but Eric's been doing a lot of the commits along with Andreas Eriksson. I know there were things that they wanted to get done. There were some last-minute patches to Core 4 that broke everything that we had to revert right before we did the 4.0 stable release.
A couple of those I know
Yeah.
they are working to get in as soon as possible, and I think there is a 4.01 plan
Yeah.
soon.
And likewise, I mean, the 4.0 release came out, you know, just like a week and a half ago, but there's some things that lag behind it, like we need to make sure that NDO utils supports all the new fields and works properly with Core 4, and then not only for Core users, but then also, I mean, we will use that under the hood in XI as well. So there are always things that get missed on anything that we're working on with deadlines. You know, you'd like to do everything, but you can't always do it. You guys know how it is.
With Nagios, it does monitoring of systems and all that stuff, but it doesn't necessarily do the monitoring of how users go through your system and the steps they go through it. So if you will, like when you're using the dev tools in a browser and able to see all the pages launched, is there anything like that that's planned for Nagios? Either like a library that can be compiled with your code so that we can have a unique identifier and know what the user did in order to generate the error and trigger, a bad behavior on your system, high I/O or high CPU, so you can then replicate it in a lower environment and figure out what your issues are.
Is this question, are you asking about the ability to basically record what you guys are doing in order to send us debug information? Or are you talking about recording web applications, user interaction with web applications in general?
Well, I was looking at not necessarily send it back to you guys for further investigation, but more for the teams that are supporting like internal applications. So we have a custom app that we want to know what the clients have done and where they've dropped off, or they triggered something that caused our system to crash. So we can see, or CPU to spike. So yeah, you guys alert that the CPU is high, but what actually triggered that CPU to go high? I've seen other products that have that kind of capability. Just wondering if you guys had plans of that as well.
Well, you've got some built-in stuff with monitoring load or number of, you could probably monitor number of active sessions,
I think some of that's going to be very specific to the application in which you're monitoring and the types of plugins that you're utilizing to monitoring them. We have actually talked about another project that may get added in, maybe another open source one that would basically have some correlative abilities and maybe be able to find items that kind of maybe came together at the same time or events that came in. What you're talking about where you're like pinning it down to a specific user action, maybe a little bit more difficult unless that user action generated a log and you were also monitoring the logs at the same time. Otherwise,
Yeah, there are too many variables, because you could look at, determining what the real problem is. Do you have too many visitors on your website? Is your web application that's written poorly, or is it the backend database systems? What log files or what metrics do you actually gather? I mean, that's actually a question that I think you guys need to figure out, like what systems comprise the bigger systems that you care about. You can monitor those individual metrics, like current users, current sessions, CPU load, all that kind of stuff, number of queries per second, or whatever you want to do. But that's highly kind of specific to
and
what
some
you
of
guys-
it could also come into how you group the items together. So like, for example, we mentioned another open source project is the business process intelligence. If you maybe had an application that was comprised of many different pieces, and then when events occur within that, maybe you could use that as a correlative data, or have them see if one is triggering another, et cetera.
Kind of odd. I should probably be able to answer this question, but so as David mentioned in his talk, having the ability to put Nagios on a $35 piece of equipment with its own monitor, I mean that's kind of a step away from the data centers. So I guess my question would just be generally for like the hobbyist or whatever, or for home automation, or for just tracking anything from like our Roombas have Twitter accounts by now. So, if someone were to adopt Nagios Core as like a home automation platform, I mean, just generally, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is awesome. Like, I've done some of that stuff in my house. My wife was wondering why in the heck I was running temperature probes in our attic. It's, it's because I want to monitor temperature and automate, stuff. People have done it. I think it's cool. But
Yeah, and I also agree. I don't think that there's in Dave's pies. I mean, that's a perfect implementation of a $25 piece of equipment doing super cool stuff, right? I mean, you install Core, it's free. You have a $25 piece of equipment. I missed your talk this year, but I saw it last year. And if it breaks, you just throw it away and you just get another one. So
I will buy some units from you if you can manufacture those for me with the motion detection. Yeah.
And I guess actually I have a question for you, Dave, because I didn't get to ask at your presentation. is you had a question about Nagios 4 ARM processors, and I think that's kind of a good. I'm very glad to have seen your talk because that's a great kind of branching out idea. Are you doing any sort of development in terms of, plugins for monitoring X? Just return a 0, a 1, or a 2 so that you can, measure current to determine when your TV is on or off, and then report that to Nagios. Are you doing anything like that?
Yes. My home office is covered with very badly made circuit boards at the moment, doing quite a lot of strange things like that. It's just current because there's a growing urge for people to know in a green world how much power the house is taking, what happens when you do certain things. Most people have got kind of house-wide sound system where they broadcast the sound to different rooms. All that kind of control gets integrated, and the bugbear is always that you tend to come with a particular manufacturer's solution, whereas using the Pi, using control systems like Nagios to tell you things and respond and ring you up and read to you in the middle of the night if you're unlucky, then that's the sort of space it's in. That really is the space it's in. And Core was always designed to be efficient and customizable for particular processor sets and memory sets, if you like, and that's what it uses.
Cool.
All right, I've got a question. So, what do you guys use for log monitoring right now? Because we're thinking, we get so many requests for, okay, we want to monitor log files either on Linux, Unix, or Windows boxes. What do you guys use for log monitoring? There's a lot of different options, so let's start out with open source solutions that you're happy with. Is anybody happy with their open source solutions?
Matthias Kettner's checked log files.
Okay, that's a plugin. That's not a log
Analysis
management
tool.
solution, I
Yeah,
guess.
Ethan's more talking like a log server that you're going that, for example, you would be taking log data from
Multiple sources.
multiple sources all across your infrastructure, sending them to one central place, theoretically, and where you could query that data to be able to retrieve it at some point in the future.
Then a hypothetical open source version of XPO logs that doesn't exist.
Sweet. Is anybody using anything that does exist that they're happy with? Open source? Log session what? Does anybody, what kind of commercial, does anybody using a commercial log management solution? Splunk? Yep. So what do you like about Splunk?
It's really easy to search stuff. It scales well, except that the pricing scales awfully. It's really nice up to half a gig a day, and then after that the curve looks like that. Yeah.
So their pricing model's based on gigs of logs?
How much log is coming in. So it's the only groups that can justify the flow are security groups that,
Sure.
if we get broken into, it's a big deal.
So how much log data do you think you'd have, for example, in your environment that you'd care about per day or per month?
So if I were doing server logs, happens to be my master's thesis, if I were doing server logs, just pulling syslogs for 38,000 devices, I would probably have a lot more than I can afford in Splunk, I would guess. Even if I crank them down, I'm, to something as reasonable as 5,000 or 10,000 lines, log entries per day per server, that adds up to quite a bit.
Is anybody else using a solution other than Splunk that you like?
We're looking at Logstash.
Logstash?
XPO logs.
What was that? XPO logs. All right.
Right about it.
Honestly, I think it's a lot better than Splunk, to be totally honest. And probably cheaper, although they changed their licensing, so I'm not really sure. But it's a great product.
I just used you all for product ideas, so that's what I did.
You were gonna,
So-
because I don't want to pay for it.
It's actually, it's one of the things that we do get asked about quite often, and actually implementing log file monitoring, either on Linux or Unix or Windows boxes with the stuff that's out there right now for Nagios plugins is still a pain. I mean, it's easier to do on the Linux Unix side than it is on the Windows side, trying to interact with the Windows event log interface. So there are a lot of good things about Splunk, and people do say good things about it. The biggest drawback is the pricing.
As Abe mentioned, the scaling on the price is the drawback of it, but if you were looking at a product, we scale up largely quickly in size. I have 2.5 billion log events in 7 weeks, just SendMail logs from our infrastructure. So trying to use it broadly, okay, someone else is going to pay for the Splunk, so I'm really happy with it. But it's a very large solution to meet our needs.
So in relation to this, and you guys can change the subject if you want, but until you guys ask a question, I'm going to ask a few more about this. What are the core things that you care about? That my assumption coming into this is that if you're going to manage logs, you want the ability to easily search your logs. You want the ability to automatically archive your logs and get rid of old log data, but keep enough so that you're in compliance with whatever rules that you have to comply by, and then to do some statistics and maybe some alerting integration with that. Is there something else that you need that isn't in that?
Would that also include security logs? Because that's a big burden I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be. It would be.
Probably you would choose the logs that you want to send to the specific server, and then
Yeah,
this is a theoretical server. It doesn't
yeah,
exist yet.
it will, maybe by next conference, but we've talked about it. I think what we would do is potentially build a log server solution that sits at a level that's higher than syslog, for example. So it can pull in syslog data, but it can also pull in arbitrary log files, similar to what Splunk can do. We can just send arbitrary data to it, pull in Windows event logs natively, whatever, and that would sit at a higher level and allow you to manage that kind of stuff at a price point that does not scale.
Like a
with your
rocket.
bandwidth usage.
Well, one of the
log
other,
usage.
the main use I'm finding for Splunk is that it replaces these chain greps when I'm trying to find transactions in SendMail to troubleshoot events. And that, of course, ties in directly if I'm using a monitoring product. I see an event and I want to go dig through logs to see what caused that, what the heck happened. Being able to build indexes and have them so that the searching is quick. So I can build transaction definitions to troubleshoot web application events. These are all things Splunk does really well in my brief experience so far. But are, of course, the reasons why it's so expensive in a hurry.
All right. We're just going to take all the good ideas and come up with something.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to at least change the
Right.
price on that for
Right.
everyone.
Well, it's it's a difference between like Nagios Core is free, Nagios XI, the price ranges, but even the highest cost of the product is $1 million per year cheaper than Unicenter or Tivoli, when you can do most of what that product can do. So anyway,
And in some cases more.
yeah. All right, thank you. So you guys can ask questions now. If you don't ask questions, we'll ask questions. We'll keep doing it. So.
Is there plans to do a tighter integration between XI and Network Analyzer, so when you're in XI, you can select a host and see the traffic that's associated with that host, and vice versa?
That is actually a really good question. I think you should put that down on there.
Okay.
We do have integration, and we actually are building a little bit more, but I hadn't ever really specifically thought of a specific host.
So this is good. So in Nagios XI, you want to be able to
Like have a tab on the service, or like on the host detail page, for example, that says, hey, can you show me the network analyzer data for this particular IP?
You can see destinations or source that it's connecting to.
Right, so you could see, Nick, are you listening?
Yeah. This is,
So you could see,
is-
it's basically, so if your source is, you know, abc.com, www.abc.com, for example, and you want to have it like a tab that would say, show me queries that are items whose source and or destination are these two items. I actually think that's an excellent idea, and I think that's a good integration point, and I would expect to see it added in the future. Possibly. I told Nick a few weeks ago that the popularity of NSTI is increasing dramatically from what I see.
Yeah.
People are using it. NSTI was created a few years back and then was updated maybe a year ago. The popularity of it has grown, and as a matter of fact, there's a lot of people that have been asking for integration. I had Nick put that on his a little bit higher priority to-do list about 2 weeks ago. And so that is something that will be revisited and probably, actually might have even done a little bit of work on it already. Yeah. So that as well as tighter integration in XI, I would imagine that would come soon.
Yeah, and I would just make a comment that like any future products you guys come out with, even if this log that you were referring to, the whole benefit, at least for myself, is you know, all of us are pretty familiar in like Core and, you know, moved on to XI, and basically these are modules, in my opinion, that would emphasize the quality and the ability of XI. And even though they're different products, so different licensings, whatever you guys decide, but just from a user perspective, the simple navigation between one product to another product to another product, at the end of the day, it's Nagios. Whatever module we end up choosing, it is what it is. But I don't have to open up a new UI, log in with a different user, do my search all over again.
so, I mean, you ideally would also like single sign-on or central, you authenticate to XI.
Yes.
And that's easily doable, actually, I think, with the backend API credentials that we've used in our other systems. But we will certainly put that on the you know, to-do list. I mean, monitoring systems like Core or XI are kind of a central hub of a bunch of stuff in IT, because when they just take action when things happen. They might alert you. They might just log something. Maybe they run an event handler. But it's kind of a central, you know, provides a central function for IT stuff. So.
Yeah, and then we
we'll
just
make
simply
sure
try to
it's gonna be-
correlate it with other info.
Yep.
Right, so you can look at traps, you can look at network traffic, and so on.
Correct. Ideally, we've discussed this, that the integration between some of the items needs to be improved, the different products that we have, and some of that for items going forward, we'll definitely be working to integrate them more tightly. The network analyzer thing was just a perfect example of the way that the multiple products can come together to make it easier for you guys to actually use the product, and yeah, better for us to integrate the two together.
Yeah, I would think in regards to that if you had some system that had a host name in it, they should be able to click the host name and go to the other tool that has that host data and be right there with it.
Yeah, and the
So-
integration for those tools, especially if you're like on the host detail page or something, it actually
easy.
probably would not be very difficult for us to add that functionality. And so, especially like in Network Analyzer, there's certain things that you would regularly want to do from a specific host name. And at the very least, you should be able to one click, like, you know, run a query with this host as the source IP, destination IP. That's minimalistic, but at a very minimum, that capability as well as maybe some visualization should be able to integrate right in there.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
since
idea.
you did mention the host detail page, there's ways to enhance the display prior to going to the host detail page with little icons here and there, so on.
Mhm.
Is there a possibility of maybe having the ability to add more of those icons? Can those be extended out currently, or do I not know how to do
You mean
that?
in the quick actions?
Yeah,
link?
like you have a host and a bunch of services listed, and you can have items that are to the right
Oh,
of the name
okay.
of the
Yeah.
service that you click on?
There's a component Don't we have one
Okay, the
already?
icons actually, so if you're looking like at the table of hosts and you have the little icon like it's a Windows, a Linux, a this, or that, is that correct?
And you click on those and there's a URL
Yeah,
associated.
those icons are actually, the icons are actually a parameter in the CCM, and most wizards will automatically put the icon there for you.
Yeah, I'm just running the core, so I'm just looking
Okay,
at
in core, the same thing goes. There's an icon field.
So
I don't
you
know
Yeah,
what
but I
it's
think the
called.
question is adding.
Can I add more? Like-
So, like in XI, there's a component that allows you to add more drop-down actions.
Yep, there's a
and-
callback there,
yeah.
but in core, you would have to.
You have to modify
You'd
the
have to modify
CGIs,
the.
Yeah, because there's like a notes URL and
Yep.
there's a notes description. So I
Yep.
actually use the notes URL for like PNP for Nagios integration. Then
Right.
notes description, I actually put bracket ahref equals, and I put a whole bunch of like 5 or 6 URLs in there with a break between them in order to get a list of additional things. But I have to actually open up the host page to get there, as opposed to just clicking on an icon
Yep.
on where the colors are on the other page.
Yeah, you would have to, in core, you'd have to modify the status CGI.
So is there any possibility of seeing that in the future is, I guess, my
In
question.
core or in XI?
Well, I guess you said it's already there in XI, right?
In XI, it's super easy to do if it's not already there.
I think it
It
already
might be
is. I
in
think there's a
the
callback that
custom
you could
thing, yeah.
do with a component.
I don't know. We'll
Seems
put it on
pretty
the-
useful,
We'll put it
though.
on the to-do list, I guess, for Eric. I mean, the problem gets to be, you want a certain types of links, right? And somebody else wants something totally different, so it needs to be
Just the
made.
ability to add something. Yeah.
Right, and that's what, as long as it's generic and abstract, then that's okay. So you can define like what type, the image, the description, what it does, that's a possibility. I'll add that to the queue, all right? So
So I have a-
multiple actions, probably? Multiple action, like icons, like probably an icon description and like a URL.
Right. Like, for example, if
like-
you wanted to have, click on something to open up a remote console session on something else, and then
Like
maybe
you have like the equivalent of like the notes URL, is that what we're saying? But you had like notes 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right, the ability to
5,
have
so
more
each
than
of
just
those
one
have-
of those, to have bunches of those if you want. If you fill it in and populate it, then it shows up on the screen. That kind of a thing.
Okay.
It allows us to integrate with other places where we have CMDBs and other things that we want to have additional URLs available. I'm looking at something that's red, I want to click on something, I want to see the whole hardware inventory of that system, what software is installed on it, and so on. One example of an additional link I might want. Another click and puts me a remote console on the system.
Yeah, I think the one easy way to maybe do it is just to add support for like a Nagios Core 3 and later supports custom variables for hosts and services, is to just set up, have the CGIs recognize a certain pattern of custom variable name so that it's already supported, because I think that's the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, all the changes to that have to flow down to like Nagios QL, NComp, CCM, all these like configuration front ends. Yeah. And most of those already support those
Yeah, that
custom
would-
variables.
That would make it fairly easy
Super
to be able
easy.
to add those. To be able to add those one-off, you would have to, obviously, we'd have to document what they're called, but as long as you just added the extra free variable, you should be able to.
Yep. All right, cool. Solved. Now somebody just needs to program it.
Yeah.
And test.
So I had a question about, kind of related to multi-site, but the concept of multi-customer, where if I have different customers with, say, different service level agreements, I need to treat them a little bit different in priority when they call in. Have you thought about maybe kind of segregating those customers, but yet being able to monitor them kind of all at once from a central command center type thing?
First, which product are you using?
I'm using Core,
Okay.
so.
Well, I mean, right now you've got the central, there are a couple different, central dashboards that you can use, and there are probably half a dozen you can choose from. Well, maybe not half a dozen, but at least 3 that I know of. The question is really 2 questions. one, how to centralize the views, which that's already done. You could say it's done. The other is how to represent it to you so that you know this server belongs to a really high priority customer.
I'm going to propose a third question, and that is, it depends on the types of customers too, because if you're providing this like as a service, I presume, software as a service to organizations, there's different levels of customers, and some will absolutely freak out if their data is anywhere remotely close to the same machine that another service is on. So keep that in mind, because that's a third thing. While the actual being able to split the views out, like Ethan said, it's kind of done if they're just users and they only have access to stuff that they can see. It's monitoring their items, but.
I mean, in core, it's easy to whip something together if you write even a simple PHP central dashboard that's getting data from, like, say, 3 different Nagios core servers. And you got a separate config file that maybe for the time being you have to manually configure and say, customer 1, these are their servers. Make the font like super big and red, so when you're looking at it, you know that it's a really big deal.
This is a suggestion, and it comes from using Tivoli. They have the idea. Today, everything in Nagios, the services are well-defined and discreetly associated with a host. And that makes sense for active monitors. But for passive, what I'd like to be able to do is define that passive monitor and say, any host may receive this. But I don't have to go out and pre-populate that across all the hosts. And then at any point in time, I can just send in that passive alert, and as long as I have the host name, it should dynamically get added to the host. For instance, one of our applications that we support has maybe 1,000 sub-applications, and I want to be able to generically send in an alert from any one of the sub-programs. But I don't want to have to predefine all 1,000 against every host.
Yeah. Well, in XI currently, when Nagios XI receives a passive check for a service that is not yet defined, it shows that you can see it in the unconfigured objects area, where it's like, here's a list of things that we've received data for that haven't been set up yet. So right now, the step for you to say, yep, I actually want to monitor that, requires an action on your part. But in 2014, one of the things that we want to do is automate stuff. So you could actually go in once and click, yes, I want to enable the option for
Will
stuff
that be
that
available
comes
in core as well?
Probably not, because it's not, and this is where people often ask about features like this, is it in core? It's outside the scope of core, actually, because in XI, we don't add it to core. In XI, it's a bunch of glue underneath the hood that's accomplished with cron jobs and shell scripts and some PHP stuff on the front end.
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting, the Nagios engine would receive that alert, validate that the service was generically defined, and then dynamically populate it, attach it to the host that was sent in there.
Probably not. I think that the job of adding new things to the monitoring engine needs to be at a higher level, just outside the monitoring engine.
And just to kind of clarify, the tools are built into core, where you can add hosts through the command pipe, or you can turn on monitoring of various things. In additionally, when those come in, the core engine does log all those. I'm basically giving you a tip, but
Sure.
The core engine logs all those in a very specific way.
Yeah. And then one additional question, have you ever considered having more severities and even potentially making it configurable?
Yeah, other than, okay, warning, unknown critical.
Yeah.
There are additional
Like an
severity levels.
informational or maybe even minor.
Potentially. It gets difficult because we have to deal with backwards compatibility of plugins. Yeah, we could probably do that. You'd have to abstract that to, like the business process view, where it's like an abstract idea that it has some status based on the status of subcomponents. Maybe it would be like an abstract status, where underneath the hood, the plugin might return an unknown or a critical, but it actually gets translated to info or severity 2 or emergency or whatever you want to call the levels. Do you have examples of statuses, status codes or types that you'd want to exist?
I know I've wanted an information code just to, we have a knock center watching the screen. I just want to send in some kind of an information. I don't really need a severity tied to it.
So basically underneath the hood, it's always okay.
Yeah.
So it's changing the label that's displayed from okay to info.
And then again, that relates to the first question.
Yep.
I don't want to have to predefine, the informational thing I'm sending in. But
Right, and you might do that. For example, you might do that in the service or host definition. Maybe that's where you have something that's like, well, okay, override. Don't, instead of okay, display it as something else. Display it as info.
You could actually use the negate plugin to just change okay to info.
Yeah, but it'll show up as green in the CGI too.
Oh, I see. So
versus
you
like
just want it
gray
to
or
not
blue
be
or something.
the same
if you
color?
wanna see something
exactly,
different.
blue would be what I would think informational is.
Yeah, it presents more problems because it affects the UI too, because you have to be able to sort by status and drill down. And info is not exact. It's similar to, but not exactly okay. Anyway, and we're getting really deep into stuff. Put that on somebody else's to-do list. Great idea though, so I'll add that. Yeah.
Is there also the plan to further enhance the email notification? So as opposed to sending out individual emails to recipients, send it out to a group. That's twofold. One would be faster processing of emails if the system's a little bit overwhelmed. I've had situations where I can't actually send emails. Nagios says, no, I'm waiting on system resource before I send. Second would be if someone acknowledges the alert, and someone wants to follow up further on what's the current action because you haven't heard from anybody in, say, 30 minutes or something like that, you can just reply to the email as opposed to trying to figure out who is on that distribution for that host.
Yeah, I promised somebody email acknowledgement.
And as
would
a
be
matter of
present
fact,
in XI 2014.
and as a matter of fact,
I told you he promised.
Yeah,
and I've actually worked with a couple people to actually accomplish the same request on an offline thing, and so that's something that Ethan made promises on, and so I would imagine that would be there for the quick acknowledge. To go back to the first question about instead of sending individual messages to send them to a group. My first suggestion would be to add the group to like a mailing list or something. Is that where you're just send a mail to a mailing list?
And you can definitely do that, and that's the workaround I've had to do. But what the problem is in XI is that no one logs in as the group. People log in as themselves. So then what do you do with permissions? Then you have to add dummy email addresses so they don't get 2 email alerts, so they can have access. And then you can have multiple distribution groups that receive it. So for example, for an application, it might be a CPU high. So you probably want your sysadmins and your application support and development. But if it's hardware or a hard drive or something like that that's gone, you only want your sysadmins because they'll be the ones contacting your vendor. So grouping it into one group won't work. You need that flexibility to have multiple distribution groups so that everyone sees who's receiving it, and then you can reply on that thread. Let's just say whatever, the CIO is wondering why the heck is my Exchange server, or not Exchange, that would be bad on an email, but why is my database down or something like that? You're not going to ask your CIO to log into Nagios to figure out who that distribution is.
Right, I think some of the challenge is going to come in with, so it's obviously granular now to individual contacts. the original preface to your question was the fact that your system was having a hard time sending the emails individually because of system resource issues. Some of that may be solved just simply by resources being freed up, disk I/O being freed up as we maybe move to
Yeah,
Core 4.
Well, and is the problem solved if your system has available resources to send emails out as configured now?
Well, the ability to send, yes, obviously that's to load. So that's a separate thing. I'm just saying it would have to process through each one. So let's just say there's a batch of 100 users. It might be able to get to the first 20 and then wait to get to the next.
So, I mean, in that situation, so you're talking about load, you're sending out emails from your monitoring server, and really what you could do, and this would require some glue underneath the hood or something, where XI might want to send an email to 100 people, but really all that is submitting some kind of job for a mail system to do that. You could actually ship the job over to another server that actually sends the email out. So you don't have your mail agent, like, hey, I'm not going to do this because the system's overloaded. So the XI box could basically hand the job of sending an email out to some other server. There's an SMS modem, multi-tech modem add-on for Nagios XI if you want to send SMS messages, and that's kind of how that works. XI will say, hey, piece of hardware over there, send an SMS, and all it does is tell it to do its job, and then the modem, it might take 60 seconds to actually send that SMS out, but it's not slowing down XI.
And I understand, but if you look at it from a different perspective, is it more efficient to send out 20 separate emails or one email to 20 different recipients?
Well, it kind of depends, because if you're sending one email, you're taking away some of the flexibility of each of those individual users having the ability to specify their own custom notification times, whether they want to, in fact, receive that particular type of notification. And in XI, that was actually a feature. So I honestly would maybe add a contact, pipe that contact to a different notification handler, and have the notification for the particular groups just be a contact, not an individual user. Those groups could send to mailing lists.
Yeah, that's true.
I personally prefer role-based as opposed to user-based. So role-based would be based on a group. So if you add members to a group and then just handle it on the group level. It's just the same thing as when you're granting access to something. You don't grant access to XYZ, you make XYZ part of a group, and that group has permissions to that resource. To me, it just makes, I understand the flexibility, but to me, from a management perspective, it sounds a whole lot more efficient.
Which is kind of what XI does, right? And Core, I mean, you just add your contacts to the group. It does send out the messages individually to each of the contacts that are the appropriate people to receive them. I guess I don't really know that there's anything that we could do without hurting the flexibility that Core or XI have by forcing it to bundle those together in like BCCM or something like that.
Well, if there were some way to, after you go through the filters that you mentioned earlier about Joe doesn't want to receive messages at this time and so forth, so that once all the individual contacts have been identified, if there was a way to specify in as an attribute of
The XI call handler.
well, I'm not even thinking of XI, I'm thinking of Core as well. Just some way to funnel all those individual command calls for the notification commands down to a single invocation of a command that from the group name, from the contact group name, extrapolates a mailing list.
So there's a trade-off,
okay,
right? There's efficiency versus customizability. So we can send to an email list. You can, craft the headers of, to basically send to multiple addresses. But in XI, we give the individuals the ability to customize what the contents of their notification message is.
Yeah, so each individual
And so as
message
soon as you
could be
do
different.
that, you can't send the same message to everybody. It's all customized on a per user basis.
I'd take that hit. I honestly don't, because one of the biggest pushbacks I had to migrating to Nagios, so this took me about 8 months for people to buy in on Nagios. So one of the biggest fights I had was exactly that. Nobody wanted it unless the distribution was there and they could see it. So I had to hack around it. And I don't know anybody on my group, not saying that people don't do it, hence why people choose Nagios, because of the flexibility. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. But most people accept what it is, right? Sysadmins want it clean and they want the data. And most of them think the same way. You know, what host is affected? What service is affected? When did it start? Let's go look at it. It's the basic stuff that you put on there. We're not asking to add all this gibberish that no one's going to read at anyways. If you want further information, either log into Nagios or get onto the box. But I personally, I don't know about anybody else, I take that hit, get it standard, and allow the distribution of, or email that everyone would see who's receiving it. So then I can't say that, you know, you weren't part of that host notification.
So like an option for the administrator to override the default behavior as it is right now implemented in Xi to basically to allow that functionality.
Yes.
So you could make the decision for your organization, like, hey, we're not going to let users customize their email because we're going to do it differently.
Well, one
that's
thing
fine.
that you had asked is just the option for them to see who's receiving the message. That's actually, you can customize the notification handler to include the contact groups macro, or I mean it's the contacts macro, and it actually will give you a common separate list of all of the usernames that actually were part of the initial notification.
Yeah.
So you could add that. You could add that in, and then in Xi you would want to change the default template that you're using, and you can export that out with the notification management tool to include the new macro that you added the command.
Okay.
And it can just give you a list of the users that were part of that initial notification.
Okay, thanks.
And I think that's something, you we'll probably have some back and forth on the forums about this, like the details of like, okay,
As a
if
matter
it's
of
going to work, could it work like this?
As a matter of fact, I believe we've done this on the forums, so I can't exactly remember the macro name. It's like contact. I don't know, contact members or something like that. One of them gives you the individual contact that actually is being contacted. It's just kind of repetitive. The other one will give you a list of everybody that's part of the specific contact, and that's the one that you're really going to want. And there is a discussion on that, and step by step on how to do that on the forum somewhere. I can find it for you.
So we're at 5:30, which is, we've blown past the end time. for
Yeah, I
this,
wasn't
and
gonna stop
Mike
you.
has
You were-
been very nice and
That's all
not
right.
said anything, like hasn't kicked us.
No, it was spirited. It started out a little slow, but once we got going, it was good.
But I mean, I'll stick around, and answer more questions.
I'm
but I
good.
don't.
If we want to keep going, I can go for a little bit. No big deal.
There's a
We have some
limit.
more questions?
We are recording it, which at some point the recording folks can leave and shut it off, and that's fine. But
I actually have a question.
all right.
And the question I have is, from what you've seen so far, is this is something these guys just put together as a fill-in? Is this something that you guys would like to see at future conferences? Be able to talk to these guys and do this again?
Yeah, and it actually came, it happened as just kind of a one-off joke at one of our team meetings where someone said, hey, maybe you should sit down and let people ask you questions because, and we're like, maybe we actually have a spot. Maybe we should actually just do that and give the community members or the attendees a chance to sit down and just pick our brain. I mean,
Yep.
It's good for us. It's good for anyone that has questions, and even people that didn't have questions that were listening. They might have picked up a tip or helped us come up with a new product that meets some need or something like that.
One question that I have for you guys, for next year's conference, we've thought about two potential ideas to, one, have sort of like the equivalent of a Linux install fest where it's like we'll help you guys spin up, test out the different products or add-ons or open source projects that you're interested in, just block off one of the rooms for 2.5 hours. Would that be interested interesting to some of you? I mean, obviously, we'd probably want some heads up so you don't walk in the room and have like a list of 30 things that you want us to magically do. But if we had some preparation time, we can get some things together. Would that be interesting?
A lab area like that's very beneficial.
Okay.
I've seen that at other conferences where, back in the day when I used to go to Novell's Brain Share, they had an entire room just for lab areas like that.
Yeah. Okay. Because we'll try. I think we'll try to do that next year. And we were thinking about doing the equivalent of one for the development side, like customizing a component or wizard for XI. If you're interested in that, or if you're interested in writing a plugin, is maybe having a dev fest where you can sit down and talk with some developers and try out some code and figure out, you know, why something isn't working, or get suggestions for how to improve something. So I don't know if you guys are developers or not. I'm guessing you've written a few scripts in your time. So maybe you don't need help from anybody. I don't know. Anyway.